Good morning, students. We have seen till now in this chapter about the Mahajanpads and the other Mahajanpads apart from Magad. And we have been, for the last 2 days, we have been covering a certain very important towns and kingdoms of southern part of the country, that is South India. And firstly, let me say I'm sorry about this black screen that you see in front of you. It is just because internet never cooperates in the area where I live. It always kind of gives me a problem, so it's just not working. So coming back to the new topic that we start today, which is towns and trade. Now, new cities. Now let us retrace our step back to the urban centers that emerged in several parts of the subcontinent from 6th century before Christ. Okay, as we have seen, many of these were the capitals of Mahajanpads. Virtually all major towns were located around the routes of communication. Some, such as Patliputra, were on the river routes, others, such as Ujjaini, were on the land routes, and yet others, such as Puhar, were near the coast from where the sea routes begin. Now, students, it was naturally considered to be very important that if a kingdom or a ruler wanted to be prosperous and wanted his people to be prosperous, his empire to be prosperous, he had to ensure that the trade flourished in his empire. Okay, and because without trade you can't really make money, and if you don't make money, then you are a poor kingdom. So a poor kingdom can't achieve much. So that is something which all the rulers aspired to achieve, and then they wanted to develop as many number of trading towns and cities and hamlets, as much as many as possible. Okay, now but coming back to the line which is others, such as Ujjaini we all know where it is. It's in modern Madhya Pradesh, were along land routes, and yet others, such as Puhar. Now you might not have heard of Puhar, though it is there in the map. If you see the map, on the page number 43, that is if you see in the southern tip of India, the eastern southern tip, that is Puhar. It's almost the north of Sri Lanka. That's what it looks like. But Puhar, you should remember one very important thing about Puhar is that River Kaveri, which happens to be one of the most important river systems of South India, River Kaveri actually comes and joins the sea right at Puhar. Okay, it's almost like a small delta area. That is the area where River Kaveri merges and embraces Bay of Bengal. Okay, now so urban populations, elites, and craftspersons. Uh, Although it is difficult to conduct extensive excavations at most sites because people live in these areas even today, unlike Harappan cities. So it's essentially what they are trying to say is, unlike Harappa, where all those, or rather the Indus Valley civilizations, where most of the sites have been abandoned, it fell into disuse for whatever the reason, whether the river changed their course, for whatever might have been the reason why people left those places. But these areas in South India where the early civilizations developed and prosperous and reached their zenith, those are very, very inhabited towns and villages even today. So people live very much there. There is enormous amount of activity that keeps happening all the time. So those areas, or rather these areas, are not that they are undisturbed. They are always kind of in motion. So excavation work is very difficult, and even if you excavate things, a lot of evidence from the past would be gone, because for hundreds of years people have been moving in those areas, people have been building in those areas, people have been constructing in those areas. So naturally it is not at it is not as intact. The sites would not be in good condition, at least not from the archaeological point of view. So by the 2nd century before Christ, we find short votive inscriptions in a number of cities. Now, what are votive inscriptions? It is there given right at the bottom of the page. Votive inscriptions are the ones which record gifts made to religious institutions. And that is something which you need to understand, that in India, enormous amount of grants and donations and gifts were given by the rich people of the society, the aristocracy, the kings, the queens. All of them used to be extremely charitable to all these religious organizations and institutions. Okay, so these mention the name of the donor and sometimes specify his or her occupation as well. They also tell us about people who lived in towns: washing folk, weavers, scribes, carpenters, potters, goldsmiths, blacksmiths, officials, religious teachers, merchants, and kings. So essentially giving you the idea of a general population, or the general constitution of the population. That is basically the kind of people who lived in the town. So, students, please remember this map. This map happens to be an extremely important map, which is on page number 43, map number 3, some important kingdoms and towns. You would always be asked questions from this map, okay, whether in your internal assessment examinations or your CBSE final examinations. Now, coming to the next topic, that is trade in the subcontinent and beyond. As we just saw that it was very important, and it was not just an Indian situation. That is where the important towns were on the trading routes, or the so if you see the Silk Route, which ran right from eastern part of China to Europe, it was again the same thing. Okay, it started from China, went, crossed Bactria, that is modern the confluence of areas around Turkestan and the northern Afghanistan, and it used to cross and then finally enter into areas of Iraq, and all through it would go to sometimes to Venice, and it would even go to Rome. So that is how it had all the important towns which came right in those trading routes. Okay, so overland to Central Asia and beyond, and overseas from ports that dotted the coastline extending across the Arabian Sea to Eastern and North Africa and West Asia, and through the Bay of Bengal to Southeast Asia and China. Rulers often attempted to control these routes, possibly by offering protection for a price. Now, what needs to be understood, students, is that when we talk about trade routes, it is not just about trade routes, the land routes that we are talking about, where you have caravans on horsebacks or camelbacks. That is it. No, we are also here talking about the sea routes, because sea routes were extremely important for trading in those times, and they remain important even today. Okay, so one of the major reasons why sea routes are important is because you can use a bit of your common sense, whereby it is difficult to carry things, and even today it remains difficult. It is difficult to carry things on the horseback and on the camelbacks, and the other point is you cannot carry much of the weight on them. But if you have boats and if you have ships, you can carry huge amount of trading good, whatever you want to trade in. You can carry many number of people, many number of helpers, traders, merchants. All of them can go together with enormous amount of cargo. That is something which is not possible. That is, and the other very important thing is, throughout the trading route, you have to understand that your animals need to be taken care of. They need to be fed. They might even fall sick. They might even die on the route. Okay, all that needs to be considered. Okay, which definitely leads to escalation in the prices and in your cost of doing trade. But once you have the ships and the boats, it is much more easier and much more simpler. Okay, of course there are certain risks involved, no doubt about that, but then you have to understand that the gains and the profits are also enormous. Okay, so those who traversed by these routes included peddlers, who probably traveled on foot, and merchants who traveled with caravans of bullock carts and pack animals. Also there were seafarers whose ventures were risky but highly profitable, as we just said. Okay, just read about this and then come to oh yes, the major items of trade. A wide range of goods were carried from one place to another: salt, grain, cloth, merchant ores and finished products, stone, timber, medicinal plants, to name a few. Spices, especially pepper, were in high demand in the Roman Empire, as were textiles and medicinal plants, and these were all transported across the Arabian Sea to the Mediterranean. Students, in fact, it is very interesting to note that some of the Roman emperors in those times, they used to complain that most of the gold and silver that the empire earns is lost to India, because the Romans and the people living in Roman Empire are so fond of the spices that are grown in India that the traders lose almost everything to the Indian traders of whatever earnings that are made by and the gains that are made by the Roman Empire. So it was actually a cause of concern for them. So coins and kings, to some extent, exchanges were facilitated by the introduction of coinage. Punchmark coins made of silver and copper, 6th century before Christ, were amongst the earliest to be minted and used. These have been recovered from excavations at a number of sites throughout the continent. Numismatists have studied now. Who is a numismatist? Students, people who essentially are experts in coins. The experts who study the coins. Okay, so now what are these punched mark coins? The first line, that is, or rather the second one, the punch line coins made of silver and copper. Now these are the earliest forms of coins where an empire or a king would have a certain mark which would be unique to his empire, and those marks were punched on these coins. But the other important factor or the aspect of these coins is, unlike the coins today which you see, which are of fixed and very uniformly shaped, the punched marks coins from the earliest era, that is about 600 years BC, that you can understand, students, it's almost 2500 years before. Those coins are very, very irregular in shape. They could be of any shape. The important thing was to punch mark them with the right logo or the emblem of that particular ruler. Okay, we shall continue. Thank you.